Agile is an umbrella term for development methodologies that come in different flavor. For example, there is extreme programming and Kanban and Scrum. By embracing change, Agile tries to keep the risk and the cost of changes low. The idea being that if you actually have to make changes in waterfall approaches where you go from one phase to the next, if you actually realize in the transfer phase that there was an issue with your requirements, then you will have to run through all the phases again, and it might actually be very difficult to make changes at that point. So the idea in Agile is to actually address that and realize that change is just part of the development process, and rather than trying to stop that from happening, you embrace that.
This is a way of handling uncertainty, which is a fundamental element of any project.
So the Agile Manifesto is very brief. The first part of it, we are uncovering better ways of developing software by doing it and helping others to do it. It suggests that not even the Agile approach is fixed. When you look at how people actually use methodologies like Scrum, you will see that there is a philosophy in a way that is pure Scrum, right, where you have the most rigid implementation of Scrum being on one end of the scale, and then you have organizations that implement this methodology in ways that suit them. There is probably not one perfect way of doing Agile. There is different ways that suit different situations and contexts best. So through this work, we have come to value, and then we have a set of features. On the left-hand side is what they value more in Agile, and then on the right-hand side, they're not as important. They are still important, but certainly the left-hand sides are more important. We talk about those in a moment. So individuals and interactions, working software, customer collaboration, and responding to change go over processes and tools, comprehensive documentation, contract negotiation, and following a plan. Individuals and interactions means, for example, that you have self-organizing teams. And self-organizing teams are very strongly trust-based, and that means that the teams organize within themselves how they're going to do the work, and in a way to a large extent which work they're going to do, though they are going to talk to the product owner about that. The product owner being in Scrum someone who stands in for the customer. We'll talk about that in a moment. But Agile teams organize also their way of working with each other. So you will often have a team manifesto or a team working agreement where the team will talk about in that agreement what the working hours are for the team. They might talk about when they have team meetings, how they're going to handle documentation. They might talk about how to escalate in conflict situations, or how even just they define done, right? So when we talk about done as in a task is done, what does that actually mean? And this is called the definition of done, which is an important concept to have when you define requirements. It's said to produce the best outcomes, so in that you will give teams autonomy, so you actually enable them to not only enjoy their working days more because they actually have a say in how they work and how they interact with each other, but you also produce good outcomes by allowing teams to identify the strengths of the individuals that are on the team. Then the teams need to be given the support they need, so they actually need to have the team members on the team that they need, the hardware and the software. They need support from the product owner if it's a Scrum setting where they actually understand, what the requirements are. And what is very important in this context is that teams reflect on their processes and becoming more effective. What is also important in terms of individuals and interactions, there is this focus on technical excellence. So you want to have people that are very good at what they do and also become better at what they do through exchange with others within the field. But also very important, the sustainable development. So the constant pace should be possible to be maintained indefinitely. The focus on face-to-face conversation is said to be the most efficient and effective method of conveying information. Then you have the daily cooperation between business people and developers, so that's also one of the principles. And overall, there's a very strong focus on the individuals working on the project, so trying to keep them as not only happy, but also being able to get the best out of them. The working software is the second principle of Agile. So that working software is the primary measure of progress. And this is an interesting one to actually think about. What do you consider working software? Would you think working software is that the end user is able to use it? Or would you think the working software means that it compiles, so a developer is able to demonstrate it? So that's actually, something to think about, whether what is the definition of working, what is the definition of done in essence. You do early and continuous delivery to keep the customer satisfied. So you actually deliver maybe on a weekly basis, bi-weekly, monthly, every 2 or 3 months, depending on the project, and also depending on what you define as a delivery. Going back to the question of what is working software. Delivery can also just mean that you do continuous and early delivery by showing your customer, who might not be the end user, what you've done, demonstrating to them what it looks like at this point, and basically showing them the increment that you define as working software, and they can try it out or they can look at it and they can give you feedback. But it also means that you try to create increments of delivery that you could actually give to an end user quite early to actually start getting some return on the investment that is being made into the development. So it might mean both. The third principle is customer collaboration. We already talked about the early and continuous delivery rather than one big final delivery. So important being here that you are delivering to the customer and you're collaborating with them to get their feedback and to make sure they're happy. Again, I also mentioned the business people and developers that must work together daily throughout the project.
The fourth principle is responding to change. One being the change requirement should be welcomed even when it's late in the development. Even when you have done the core of the features already and you just need to change parts of it later, that should be welcomed in an agile project. This might be challenging to plan for and might be more possible in some areas than others, but it is something that in the architecture, when it is designed, should be considered, as it gives the customers some competitive advantages when you are able to do this. For example, it allows them to react to the market, be experimental in what it is they are getting developed, even if they don't fully understand the end user's need from the start. They can then explore what it is that they are trying to get towards. This allows them to be innovative and react to changed needs. This is then facilitated by frequent deliveries and shorter timescales of delivery. That makes sense if you think about a 3-year project, for example, and you define the requirements in the first year. In essence, that means that in a linear project, the customer can only get changes after the 3rd year. Theoretically, only once everything is done, they can get changes or additions to the project. Now, in reality, it isn't implemented that rigorously, but even if it doesn't happen like that, it still is not built into the method if it isn't an agile method, not planned for or welcomed. And then finally, in order to be able to react to change and get better at it, the teams then need to incorporate frequent reflection. Maybe they need to use a different technology, have a different way of deploying things, or improve their processes overall in order to be able to react better.